Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany, was a cruel and sadistic dictator who oversaw one of the darkest periods in human history. His reign was characterized by violence, terror, and genocide, as he pursued his twisted vision of racial purity and world domination. Hitler's policies were responsible for the deaths of millions of people. He orchestrated the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. He waged a brutal war of aggression that led to the deaths of tens of millions more, both military and civilian. Under Hitler's rule, Germany became a totalitarian state, with the Nazi Party and its various organizations controlling all aspects of life. Dissent was not tolerated, and those who spoke out against the regime were subjected to imprisonment, torture, or death. Hitler's secret police, the Gestapo, terrorized the population, spying on citizens and carrying out mass arrests and executions. Hitler's cruelty knew no bounds. He was known for his fits of rage and his willingness to order the deaths of even his closest associates. He was responsible for the deaths of his own niece and longtime companion, as well as many others who fell out of favor with him. In the end, Hitler's legacy was one of horror and tragedy. He left behind a devastated continent, scarred by war and genocide, and a world forever changed by his actions. His name has become synonymous with evil and hatred, a warning of the dangers of extremism and the consequences of unchecked power. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, was a brutal and ruthless ruler who presided over one of the most violent and oppressive regimes in history. His reign was characterized by terror, mass repression, and the elimination of anyone who posed a threat to his power. Stalin's policies were responsible for the deaths of millions of people. He oversaw the forced collectivization of agriculture, which led to widespread famine and starvation. He ordered the execution of his own party members and military commanders, accusing them of disloyalty or plotting against him. Under Stalin's rule, the Soviet Union became a police state, with the secret police, the NKVD, carrying out mass arrests and executions. Those who were suspected of disloyalty or dissent were sent to labor camps or executed, often without trial or evidence of any wrongdoing. Whole families were often targeted, with wives and children sent to the gulags alongside their husbands or fathers. Stalin's cruelty knew no bounds. He was known for his fits of rage and his willingness to order the deaths of even his closest allies. He was responsible for the deaths of his own son and daughter-in-law, and he showed little regard for the suffering of his own people. In the end, Stalin's legacy was one of terror and oppression. He left behind a country scarred by violence and fear, and a people traumatized by the horrors of his reign. His name became synonymous with cruelty and totalitarianism, and his actions remain a warning to those who would seek to hold absolute power. Vlad the Impaler, also known as Vlad Dracula, was a cruel and sadistic ruler who reveled in torture and violence. He is infamous for his brutal methods of punishment, including impaling his enemies on stakes, a practice that earned him his gruesome nickname. Vlad's reign was characterized by terror and bloodshed. He ruled with an iron fist, using fear and intimidation to maintain his power. He would often invite his enemies to dinner and then have them killed in front of him, sometimes by impaling them alive. But it wasn't just his enemies who suffered under Vlad's rule. His own people were subjected to brutal punishments for even minor offenses. He had prisoners roasted alive, boiled alive, and even had their skin flayed off while they were still alive. He was known to drink the blood of his enemies and to have their decapitated heads displayed on spikes as a warning to others. Vlad's cruelty knew no bounds. He even had his own brother murdered and ordered the impalement of countless innocents, including women and children. He would often personally participate in the torture and execution of his victims, relishing their screams of agony and the sight of their blood. In the end, Vlad's legacy was one of horror and brutality. His name became synonymous with cruelty and violence, and his reign was a time of darkness and terror. His gruesome methods of punishment have been immortalized in literature and popular culture, and he remains one of history's most infamous and terrifying figures. Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia, was a cruel and brutal ruler who terrorized his people and left a trail of blood in his wake. His reign was characterized by violence, paranoia, and a ruthless determination to maintain his grip on power. From the very beginning of his reign, Ivan showed a ruthless streak. He ordered the execution of his own godfather, the Metropolitan Philip, and had many other opponents and rivals put to death or tortured. He even ordered the killing of his own son, Ivan Ivanovich, in a fit of rage. But it wasn't just his enemies who suffered under Ivan's rule. His own people were subjected to brutal punishments, including torture, mutilation, and execution for the most minor offenses. He established a secret police force known as the Oprichniki, who carried out his orders with brutal efficiency and became a symbol of terror throughout the land. Ivan's paranoia and cruelty knew no bounds. He would often fly into rages and order the execution of entire families or villages, accusing them of crimes they had not committed. He was known to torture and kill his own servants and courtiers, and he even had his own wife, Anastasia, beaten to death after a disagreement. In the end, Ivan's legacy was one of violence and fear. He left behind a shattered and traumatized nation, one that would take centuries to recover from the horrors of his reign. His name became synonymous with cruelty and oppression, a reminder of the dark side of absolute power. It is impossible to deny the brutal legacy of Genghis Khan, the Mongol emperor who is known for his merciless campaigns of conquest and destruction. He was a man who reveled in violence, and his armies were infamous for their brutality and cruelty. Under his leadership, entire cities were razed to the ground, their inhabitants slaughtered without mercy. Genghis Khan's armies showed no quarter, and their bloodlust knew no bounds. They raped and pillaged with abandon, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Genghis Khan himself was not immune to the pleasures of violence. He was said to enjoy watching his enemies suffer, and would often order them tortured and executed in the most gruesome ways imaginable. He believed that fear was the key to maintaining power, and he ruled with an iron fist. His reign was one of terror, and his people lived in constant fear of his wrath. Those who crossed him or defied him risked being put to death, along with their families and anyone associated with them. In the end, Genghis Khan's cruelty was his legacy. His name is synonymous with violence and aggression, and his reign is remembered as one of the most brutal in human history. His thirst for power and his willingness to do anything to achieve it will forever be a stain on his name, a reminder of the dark side of human ambition. Amidst the grandeur of the Roman Empire, there was a man whose name struck fear into the hearts of his subjects. His name was Nero, a figure shrouded in mystery and dark legend. Some said he was a madman, others whispered he was a demon in human form. There was something unsettling about Nero's piercing gaze and the way his eyes seemed to dart around, as if he were always watching, always waiting. He was a man consumed by power, and he would stop at nothing to keep his hold on it. Whispers of secret rituals and midnight meetings with sorcerers and witches began to circulate among the populace. They spoke of dark magic and blood sacrifices, and many believed that Nero himself was a practitioner of the black arts. Despite the fear that surrounded him, there was a strange allure to Nero. He was a man of great charisma and charm, and his subjects couldn't help but be drawn to him, even as they feared him. In the end, it was said that Nero met a fitting end, consumed by his own madness and the weight of his own evil deeds. But even to this day, the legend of Nero lives on, a dark and mysterious chapter in the history of the Roman Empire.